LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 8th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 10 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The political comedy source tonight will be from the actual news sources. There was no Real Time with Bill Maher, although he did a live special from Tulsa, Oklahoma last night that actually was a bunch of old material mostly. I do have what passes for a joke from our President Donald Trump. That'll be the political comedy, and then a response from Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, who doesn't actually find President Trump's joke about the Me Too movement to be very funny. That'll be the first clip. Then I'll have the two topics you see listed in the video description down below. Trump takes the Supreme Court, and can the Democrats stop him? A continuation of last week's topic. And then at the end, there'll be a few clips. Trump-Russia scandal continues, about this weird appearance by Rudy Giuliani. You know, I watch when they announce who's going to be on the Sunday shows late on Friday on AP, and Rudy Giuliani wasn't on there. And then he was like a late edition, went on 3 shows. It's like they know something's coming, and he's like trying to get one last spin session in, trying to knock down the special counsel's popularity ratings, or the trustworthiness ratings, and then there, I don't know if it has to do with Michael Cohen or the lack of a Trump interview with Robert Mueller, or I'll give my speculation some more when I get to those last 3 clips. The first big topic is the Supreme Court, and Donald Trump is going to pick his nominee supposedly 9 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And over in this corner, you can click on a link to a poll that I put the 4 supposed front-runner nominees or other. You can choose any of those as to who you think Donald Trump is going to nominate at 9 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Monday. We'll see whether the viewers actually get it right, and you'll see several clips on that. And a few news summaries. A lot of the news summaries were wiped out by coverage of these kids in Thailand and their escape from the cave. That was kind of in the middle. There were like 4 kids that made it out last I checked, and what's going to happen to the other 8 kids and the coach, that's supposed, you'll probably know that by the time you're watching this. But anyway, as I promised, I'm going to start with what passes as political comedy coming from our president, Donald Trump. He's trying to make a joke about Elizabeth Warren and the Me Too movement, and this is from CBS's Face the Nation. Margaret, Brennan, the host, asked Republican Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa how she reacts to this clip, and it's pretty awful, actually. And she doesn't really answer the question in terms of what she thinks of Donald Trump saying it, but she supports the Me Too movement, and she obviously doesn't think it's funny, as I will discuss with you after we watch that first clip together over here.
Senator, you are a strong female leader in the Senate, and I want to ask you about words the president said this week about one of your colleagues, Elizabeth Warren.
I'm going to get one of those little kids, and in the middle of the debate, when she proclaims that she's of Indian heritage because her mother said she has high cheekbones. That's her only evidence, that her mother said she had high cheekbones. We will take that little kid and say, but we have to do it gently, because we're in the Me Too generation, so we have to be very gentle. And we will very gently take that kid, and we will slowly toss it, hoping it doesn't hit her and injure her arm.
It's not unfamiliar for the president to attack Senator Warren, but he seemed there to be mocking the Me Too movement, which was about defending those who were victims of sexual abuse and harassment. How do you respond to that?
Well, I take Me Too very seriously, and I had, of course, when I was a young woman, volunteered at a women's crisis shelter in Ames, Iowa. And so when we see survivors coming forward, I think that we need to take that very seriously, and we need to learn from this episode in history and make sure that other survivors are able to come forward. And of course, it is something that we need to discuss throughout society, because we need to make sure that we are protecting men and women. They should never go through sexual harassment, sexual assault, or anything remotely similar to that. So I do support the Me Too movement, and I hope that others will as well. We need people to speak up, not hide these horrible circumstances.
Senator, thank you.
Thanks.
Now, I did see some pundit on one of the shows, I can't remember who it was, say that the actual White House is like a Me Too free zone, and they see it as, and that it was one of the like commentators on one of the panels on one of the, forgot to mention that I'm taking my clips from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. That was CBS's Face the Nation you just saw there, one of these big five corporate outlets. Also, down in the video description, you can see my clip list. These are the notes that I use to remind myself what's in the clips. You can click on it and see if you can follow along. There's also, if you're watching this as a recorded show, I should put time indexes between the two topics. This first topic is the Supreme Court, although I'm going to start with a sort of general news summary here, or a couple of them. First, like I said, most of the big five corporate outlets did not have news summaries. Instead, they preempted what was probably the news summaries they have prepared for coverage of Thailand. And you'll see that from this 30-second, very quick news summary from Chuck Todd. There's no package. NBC's Meet the Press always has like Chuck Todd do his intro, and then they go to a package. Instead of the package, after this 30 seconds, they went to the kids in Thailand. And I'm not really covering that, except for one brief comment I'll make that Dick Durbin will make about the kids in Thailand. But here's the 30-second news summary of a lot of the important topics that didn't get covered by a news summary by most of the press this week over here.
Good Sunday morning. We have a lot to get to today. The troubled nuclear talks with North Korea, President Trump's upcoming NATO meeting, the planned one-on-one with Vladimir Putin. I have an interview with Mr. Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, on the latest in the Russia investigation. Of course, biggest of all, we have President Trump's announcement tomorrow of his pick for the Supreme Court. But we're going to begin with a story that has the entire world's attention. The effort underway right this instant to rescue 12 boys and their soccer coach. Bill Neely is standing by for us in Chiang Rai, Thailand. Bill.
So, yeah, that was kind of par for the course. Actually, for my ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos recording from this morning was actually preempted. The first 15 minutes was preempted by ABC News giving an update on those kids in Thailand. Which I'll discuss that a little bit more in just a minute when I get to this Dick Durbin clip. But before I get to the Dick Durbin clip talking about the Supreme Court, I want to show the Fox News summary. They're like the one news program that said nothing about the kids in Thailand, even though Fox News has been covering that pretty heavily all week. Sometimes I think to sort of take the nation's attention away from the kids who were separated from their parents by the Trump zero-tolerance immigration policy. But that doesn't show up in this news summary. You'll see that it's Dana Perino, who used to be George W. Bush's press secretary. She's now hosting Fox News Sunday. And she does a brief intro about, the upcoming summit with NATO and the meeting with Putin, and then puts it over to Kevin Corke, the reporter at the White House, who talks mostly about the Supreme Court. And since it has a lot to do with conservative politics, who the nominee is going to be, it's actually fairly informative for Fox News, because they have kind of the inside knowledge about what's going on in the conservative movement, although you'll see them frame it sort of the opposite. Most people I know talk about it. They talk about, what's risky and what's safe. Their risky candidates are those who won't overturn Roe, and their safe candidates are those who are like solidly conservative. And they're not like David Souter, which you'll see is mentioned by Kevin Corke in this news summary about the Supreme Court. They also mentioned North Korea. They mentioned Vladimir Putin. And then there's this weird mention at the end about how Rudy Giuliani is now saying that there are these new conditions to talk to Robert Mueller. But you'll see Kevin Corke has this like weird teleprompter miscue where he starts reading about Mike Pompeo's problems with North Korea again when he comes back live on the lawn. And I will discuss that with you after we watch this longest news summary, biased in Fox News' favor, but at least they had a news summary, but it's because they didn't talk about Thailand over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Trump is gearing up for a high-stakes trip to Europe this week, which includes a likely tense summit with NATO allies and potential concessions to Russia in a face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin. But first, he'll announce his Supreme Court pick, a move that could reshape the High Court for decades to come. Kevin Corke is live at the White House with the latest. Kevin.
Dana, White House sources insist this will not be a nomination by committee or by congressional lawmaker input. This will fall on the president and the president alone. But that hasn't stopped competing voices on both sides of the political spectrum from trying to influence his choice. Jurors believed to be in the president's final four are thought to be safely conservative, but there's increasing pressure on Mr. Trump to nominate someone who won't draw the ire of pro-choice Republican senators. That could complicate the bid of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, whose Catholic faith has led some critics to opine, without evidence, that she'd vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. But selecting a judge with a fairly limited paper trail just to avoid a fight in the Senate is risky. Such was the case with David Souter, former justice who, despite being nominated by a conservative president, George H.W. Bush, proved to be anything but.
In choosing Justice Kennedy's replacement, my greatest responsibility is to select a justice who will faithfully interpret the Constitution as written.
Monday's pending Supreme Court announcement comes just ahead of the president's trip to Europe for the NATO summit and a pair of bilateral meetings with Britain's Theresa May and Russian President Vladimir Putin, the latter of which could prove pivotal in shaping Mr. Trump's vision of U.S.-Russian and U.S.-European relations. This as the president's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, sailed into decidedly choppy waters in his ongoing bid to get Pyongyang to give up its nuclear ambitions, with the North describing the U.S.'s tone in the latest talks as regrettable and gangster-like.
We had good faith, productive conversations, which will continue in the days and weeks ahead. In the meantime, sanctions remain in place.
Meanwhile, the president's top diplomat, Mike Pompeo, not only sailed into choppy waters, he is away as there are new developments on this conversation between the president and Bob Mueller. Have you heard about this? The special counsel now getting new conditions set by Rudy Giuliani, who told the New York Times he'd have to see how the basis of that sit-down would go, Dana, so that the Trump team could assess the Mueller team's objectivity. Very interesting indeed, Dana.
Indeed. Kevin Corke, thank you. Reporting from the White House. We appreciate it.
And you see like 30 seconds from the end of that clip where Kevin Corke somehow was like reading the teleprompter where he was supposed to be talking about the conditions for the Robert Mueller interview, and instead he starts with like president's top diplomat is not only in choppy waters, but he's away when we find out about that was kind of weird, but I think I pretty much gave the critique of that clip before I showed it, where I think it was definitely from the conservative point of view as to what is a safe nominee and what's a risky nominee. And by the way, I thought that was a good conservative point of view rundown on the four top front runners for the nomination. Like I said, there's a little eye you can click on in this corner if you want to vote on which of the four nominees it's going to be, or if you think it's going to be some big surprise for, you know, the reality show TV star President Donald Trump with his big announcement during prime time tomorrow, Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll see, like, if somebody who gets the rose or whatever, I don't know. But those were a couple of the news summaries I wanted to show you. Like I said, there weren't many. So now I'm going to get into the clips on the Supreme Court, and this is the one with Dick Durbin that I promised, that actually he has the response to these children in Thailand and being rescued from the cave, that the same kind of response I had to this story. and you'll see he talks about it in the very beginning of this clip with Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, where he also talks about basically the deficiencies of the front runners on Trump's nomination list, and whether some are less controversial than others. And anyway, that's a 2-minute clip from NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
Welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks, Chuck.
Got the Illinois-Missouri rivalry right in front of me here. Let me start with the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell has said he'd like to see it go in the direction of either Thomas Hardiman or Raymond Kethridge, believing that they would be less controversial, perhaps, than the other two. What's your assessment of that, sir?
Before I go into that, hearts and prayers are with those boys in Thailand trapped in the cave. I hope our hearts and prayers are also with thousands of children, toddlers and infants removed from their parents by the Trump administration under zero tolerance. They're trapped in a bureaucratic cave too, so let's not forget them. But to your question, all of these nominees have been pre-cleared by something called the Federalist Society. This is a group that looks carefully at each one of the nominees to make certain that they can check all the boxes when it comes to the most conservative political agenda in America. So whoever is nominated by the president, I was told by the White House they'll come off that list. Leonard Leo, the leader of this group, is the one who made the key decision.
So what is the Democratic Party strategy in the Senate? You can do the math. You know you have 49 Democratic senators. First, let me ask you this. Is everybody going to be united?
I can't say that until the president announces his nominee. Obviously, each senator understands this as an historic decision. It'll decide the future of this court for a generation or more. And so I know they'll look carefully at each nominee. I can't predict how all of my 49 or 48 colleagues in the Senate on the Democratic side will vote. I will tell you, though, simple math tells you if John McCain is absent, it's a 50-49 Senate. One Republican senator can decide the fate of any Supreme Court nominee.
In 2016, I'm going to play a quote of yours.
So there you saw Dick Durbin not only referencing the Thai children trapped in the cave and comparing them to the thousands of children separated from their parents by the Trump administration's zero tolerance policy at the border, which I wonder why the news focuses on these 12 children, or is that right? It's four, and yeah, it's 12 children and one coach trapped down there. And what about there was almost no coverage of this ACLU lawsuit that got a judge to give an order this week to say that you have the Trump administration only has a very limited amount of time, to 30 days, for all the children to reunite them with their parents. And I think actually coming up at the beginning of the week is an even shorter for the tender age, the kids years 5 and under, and apparently there are at least 38 of those that they have no idea how they're gonna meet that deadline, and it's really disgusting. And so I'm glad that Dick Durbin at least brought that up, because it was something I covered a couple weeks in a row, 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, and then the things I cover are based on what the corporate media covers in the Big Five corporate outlet news analysis programs on Sunday mornings. So there was very little coverage of the immigration issue. You just saw Dick Durbin's mention was one of the few places where it came up. But his main argument there about how all these Trump nominees are going to be right-wing conservatives. Here is Leonard Leo. I showed a clip of him last week on Fox News Sunday where he didn't get that. He did get cross-examined on what Trump said during the campaign, but he is saying, oh no, they're not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And he said pretty much the same thing to George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning. And there's something at the very end. I'm going to be committing legal analysis. I will be referring to the 9th Amendment in my U.S. Constitution. Very briefly again, reiterating something I said last week after we watched Leonard Leo explain what it is he wants from these judges, not to overturn Roe v. Wade, but just to, well, it's at the end of this minute 47-second clip that I will discuss with you after we watch together here.
Today I am keeping another promise to the American people by nominating Judge Neil Gorsuch of the United States.
Oh, I forgot to say, one of the things I like about this clip, which is kind of ironic, is it's like ABC trying to make Donald Trump look bad by showing how he misspoke when he introduced Neil Gorsuch. Saying that Neil Gorsuch of the Supreme Court, who I'm nominating to be of the Supreme Court, or you just saw the beginning of that. But then you'll see that George Stephanopoulos, right after he shows that clip that they picked out to embarrass Donald Trump, he actually misspeaks, I think, on the word pick. But sorry, I forgot to mention that before I showed you that clip over here.
Today I am keeping another promise to the American people by nominating Judge Neil Gorsuch of the United States Supreme Court to be of the United States Supreme Court. So was that a surprise? Was it?
That was the president's first Supreme Court pick in January 2017. Next one comes tomorrow night in prime time. We're now joined by the man who crafted President Trump's shortlist, Leonard Leo, on leave now from the Federalist Society, also now the president's top Supreme Court advisor. So the other big issue, of course, that is energizing so much opposition right now is the fear among Democrats, among progressives, that whoever the president appoints is going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Is it fair to say that anyone who made it onto your list is likely to be an opponent of Roe v. Wade?
No. First of all, nobody really knows. We've been talking about this for 36 years, going all the way back to the nomination of Sandra O'Connor. And after that 36-year period, we only have a single individual on the court who has expressly said he would overturn Roe. So I think it's a bit of a scare tactic and rank speculation more than anything else.
But that comes from your allies as well. I want to read from Ed Whalen, who wrote in the National Review, "No one has been more dedicated to the enterprise of building a Supreme Court that will overturn Roe v. Wade than the Federalist Society's Leonard Leo." That has been your goal.
My goal, first and foremost, has always been to find people serve on the court who believe in the Constitution as it's written. And that's really ultimately what drives the conservative legal movement. You want judges on the court who understand that the best way to preserve freedom and dignity and prosperity in this country is to have people who are going to interpret the Constitution as it's written and not play politics when they're judges.
So when they say interpret the Constitution as written, that's a code word for there's no right to privacy in the Constitution. That's the right to privacy is where they get the right to make intimate personal choices about contraception, reproduction, family relationships, sometimes medical decisions. That all falls under the right to privacy. And that has a long line of cases before Roe versus Wade, as I discussed last week, going back to Griswold versus Connecticut from the 1960s, that gave married people the right to buy contraception, and it was illegal in Connecticut. And thanks to, I don't know, National Lampoon's Vacation? No, that's different Griswold. But Griswold versus Connecticut, that is the precedent that started this whole line of right to privacy cases. And when they say the right to privacy doesn't appear in the Constitution, what they're forgetting, as I pointed out last week, 9th Amendment. Read your Constitution right here. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, meaning the fact that we wrote some of the rights down, shall not be construed. Shall is a mandatory word in the law. That means you must do this. Shall not be construed means you cannot interpret that to mean to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So the 9th Amendment specifically says the fact that we didn't write down all of the rights doesn't mean that there aren't rights that are retained by the people that we didn't write down. In fact, you shall not construe this Constitution to say that. And I don't know why the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo, why they seem to think that interpreting the Constitution as written doesn't include that very important interpretation guideline right in the 9th Amendment that says important rights can still be retained by the people even though we didn't write them down. And the right to privacy is such an obvious right. And it also appears somewhat in the 4th Amendment. But anyway, I don't want to go into all the privacy law and cats versus the United States and the reasonable expectation of privacy in the Fourth Amendment and all. Well, anyway, that is a discussion for another day. But I did want to contrast what Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society guy, said there about how, oh no, we're not going to overturn Roe v. Wade, with what Lindsey Graham says in this next clip, talking over on Fox News Sunday, where what they're worried about is that they're not going to be conservative enough. You know, you saw the Kevin Corke news summary that, you know, it's the risk is that we could get another David Souter who won't overturn Roe v. Wade. And even though I saw Lindsey Graham last week in clips I didn't take saying, you know, oh, we can't be sure that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned, here talking to Dana Perino on Fox News Sunday, he makes it pretty clear that any of the four justices that, you know, there's that poll that you can take right here and decide or tell me who you think Trump is going to nominate on his, you know, big reveal at 9 p.m. Eastern tomorrow on Monday. But he's saying they're all big lottery ticket winners if you're a conservative, which is, I guess, another code word for overturning Roe v. Wade. And then he also says that the middle-of-the-road Democrats, you know, they're the two Republicans from Maine and Alaska who supposedly are pro-choice and might vote against a anti-choice Trump nominee. And then there are three Democrats from, what is it, Indiana, West Virginia, and North Dakota, who are the other side of the middle, who could vote for a Trump nominee because they're in states that Trump won by large percentages, and they might, and they're up for election in 2018. Well, here is Lindsey Graham saying that they're going to be in big trouble, but I don't think it's true, and I will explain to you why after we watch that 96-second clip together over here.
One last question, back on domestic policy. The timing of a Supreme Court nomination seems to not be better for Republicans. You're on the Judiciary Committee. You've been around before for Supreme Court nominations. How much different might this one be, and do you feel confident that the Republicans will be able to confirm one of President Trump's nominees before the midterms?
I think I got two words, and I heard Supreme Court and confidence. So we got a technical problem, but here's my answer. Republicans are holding 4 lottery tickets, and all of them are winners. If you're a conservative Republican, the 4 people named, particularly Thomas Heidemann, I'm glad he's on the list, are all winners, and every Republican should embrace these picks. Here's the truth. Donald Trump could nominate George Washington or John Marshall, and they couldn't get through. Maybe a handful of Democrats will vote for a Trump pick because they have to politically. I've never seen it this dysfunctional. There's nobody that President Trump could nominate from a conservative event that will get many Democratic votes. But this is a nightmare for red state Democrats to oppose a highly qualified nominee. And all 4 of these people are highly qualified, been on the court, know what they're doing, mainstream judges. So red state Democrats are going to have a very hard decision. And I hope every Republican will rally behind these picks because they're all outstanding.
All right, Senator Graham, thank you for reading my mind since you couldn't hear me, and for joining us today. It's always good to talk to you, sir.
Thank you.
Of course, Dana Perino's question was about the timing. Would they be able to get this done in time? And Lindsey Graham couldn't hear the question. All he heard was Supreme Court and confidence, and he had an answer prepared anyway. His attack on the 3 Democrats from Indiana, West Virginia, and North Dakota, or saying that they're in the hot seat, all they really have to do is wait to see what Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska do. And if one of them flips, then they hold with the Democrats. And if none of them flips, then they can vote along with the Republicans, because it doesn't really matter at that point. And so I think Lindsey Graham's wrong about that. He did seem to be guaranteeing the conservative Republicans that they're going to get a good one with one of the 4 nominees that is on the list of finalists. He particularly like that Hardiman guy. I don't know exactly what that was about. You can let me know if you have some comments about it down in the comment section. And before I leave the Supreme Court topic, I want to show one more senator. This is Senator Chris Coons, and from Delaware, not a very big, important state, but I think he also, in this clip, talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation, I think he did a good job of explaining some of the other issues besides Roe versus Wade, and also there's sort of this fatalistic, you should have voted before kind of advice at the end that is actually kind of true, and I will explain it, what I mean by that, after we watch that 2-minute clip together over here.
You sit on Judiciary. I want to ask you now about the announcement we expect tomorrow from President Trump on his Supreme Court justice pick. We know, according to our own reporting at CBS from Jan Crawford, that there are 3 contenders now: Brett Kavanaugh, Raymond Kethledge, and Amy Coney Barrett. With Kethledge, it appears now in that first place position. Of these 3, are there any that you would support, or are you opposed in principle to all 3?
Well, Margaret, first, I don't think we should be having this conversation because we seem to be playing by different rules with different presidents. I'll remind you that the Republican majority refused to even hold a hearing for 10 months on an eminently qualified, confirmable, moderate judge who was nominated by President Obama. We're just 4 months away from an election now, and we should be playing by the same rules.
Well, that was presidential.
I'll do my
This is
job on the
congressional.
Judiciary Committee. I will do my job on the Judiciary Committee in advance of the congressional elections this November, and I assume President Trump will nominate someone from that short list prepared for him by 2 right-wing activist groups, the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. I'll meet with his nominee, I'll review their record, and I'll ask them tough questions to try and get to the core issue here, which is how will this next justice nominated by President Trump affect the rights and freedoms of average Americans? Margaret, this is a very important decision. It's going to affect the Affordable Care Act and the protection of pre-existing conditions. It'll affect reproductive choice and individual freedom for millions of women all over the United States. It'll affect consumer protection, environmental protection, LGBT rights. Justice Kennedy was at the center of many key decisions on exactly these issues. I'll do my job on the Judiciary Committee. We'll have difficult confirmation hearings this fall, but I hope folks who are watching will also speak up, call their senators, express their views, and see this as what it is, the consequence of an election and a reason to be more engaged and to vote.
It sounds like you're saying you're keeping it.
And, you know, what's so sad about that last part about the reason to be more engaged and to vote is that the real big mistake, and who was it? I thought I saw some pundit say this on one of the shows, and it's, I don't remember who it was again, but really the big mistake that the Democrats made is losing the Senate in 2014. If they had kept the Senate in 2014, they wouldn't be in this predicament. They'd have Merrick Garland. And it's basically elections have consequences. There may be some very low probability outcomes that don't have a conservative Supreme Court justice being confirmed by the Senate before the 2018 election. There are some things that could happen, but and there are some weird like backlash politics where it might be better for the Republicans to have a failed nominee than to have a confirmed nominee. I talked about that last week, where that may be one of the ways that Donald Trump kept his evangelical conservatives together, even though they don't really like him very much for his personal peccadillos, I guess you could say. But they stick with him because he gave them Neil Gorsuch. And there was the Scalia died and left the opening that made that an issue in the 2016 election. And so it could be better for Trump and the Republicans to also have that issue in the 2018 election, which is what the Democrats want. And who knows exactly how everything's going to play out. I mean, it would be nice if it was an election issue and we didn't have a like solid 5-vote majority for all the bad conservative things and getting rid of all the rights that have been so hard won from for so many years. And what's going to happen, I don't know, but you can like I said, vote again. One last time, I'll mention this little poll that you can click on here. Tell me who you think that Trump is going to nominate. That's my last clip on the Supreme Court. Now, as promised, I have 3 Rudy Giuliani clips, all talking about this Mueller probe. And there are 2 big developments this week on the Mueller probe. First, Michael Cohen seemed like he might be about to flip on the president. And the first clip I'm going to show is all about that. It's George Stephanopoulos, who had this personal interview with Michael Cohen, and then he didn't have video of it, but he sort of like relayed what Michael Cohen said to him on Good Morning America earlier this week. And so that's why the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip is so important on that issue. And I'll show, it's sort of an edited clip with George Stephanopoulos doing his introduction. And then there's sort of an edit to Rudy Giuliani responding to the big revelations from that interview, which came later in the Rudy Giuliani interview with George Stephanopoulos. And then I'll have 2 clips from the other Rudy Giuliani appearances, one from NBC's Meet the Press, the other from CNN's State of the Union, where he does his best to tear down the Mueller investigation in talking about how they've put these new conditions on Trump talking to Robert Mueller, which are basically, I think, a way to say Donald Trump is not going to sit down for an interview with Mueller unless he gets subpoenaed, and that'll take like months and months to resolve. And I'll get to those 2 clips at the end. And by the way, before I get to that, I have to, I saw that I got a nice super chat contribution from Sexy Bob. I appreciate those of you who support my videos with super chat contributions. There's $10 from Sexy Bob with pictures of kittens, and I don't know if you can hear Sandy over there snoring, but I will have a combination Sandy the dog and Dash the cat clip from this morning when they were both hungry for breakfast. It's about 20 seconds long. That'll be the bonus Sandy and Dash clip at the end. But before I get to that, I have my 3 Rudy Giuliani clips, and first here is George Stephanopoulos summarizing the interview, the revelations he got in his interview with Michael Cohen this week, and then asking Rudy Giuliani about that in the just under 5-minute clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
On the investigations into the president. This weekend, we're seeing a tough new line against Robert Mueller from Trump's legal team, laying out new conditions for an interview with the president. And this move comes in the wake of those strong signals from former Trump attorney Michael Cohen that he is preparing to cooperate with prosecutors against President Trump. First, my exclusive interview, where he criticized Trump's attacks on Mueller and declared that family and country, not the president, have his first loyalty. Cohen then changed his Twitter account to remove any affiliation with Trump, hired a new defense attorney from New York's Southern District, Guy Petrillo, also longtime Clinton defender Lanny Davis, who was part of President Clinton's legal team when he faced impeachment. The White House refused to answer questions about Cohen.
Is the president worried after his comments this morning that Michael Cohen is going to flip, and is he considered at all paying Michael Cohen's legal fees?
As you know, I'm not going to answer questions on this topic and would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
Can you at least tell us whether the president watched the interview this morning and potentially how he feels about the idea that his former attorney said that he would put his wife, his son, his family, and his country first, but not the president?
Once again, I'm not going to weigh into this issue and I would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
It's a good thing then that we have the president's outside counsel here, Rudy Giuliani. Thanks for coming back, Mayor. Let's start right there. What was the president's reaction to that interview from Michael Cohen?
Same as mine, which is fine. I mean, Michael Cohen should cooperate with the government. We have no reason to believe he did anything wrong. The president did nothing wrong with him, so we've gone through every document we can. We see no evidence of it. The fact that Mueller gave
all 1.3 million documents?
1.4. That we produced. Also, the Mueller himself has indicated that there's nothing here because he would have given it away, and he hasn't taken it back. And every indication we have is the president is not involved in that. And I'm hoping that Michael is able to clear himself, because I think what was done to him was really unfair. And I know he's being sensible and calm and trying to say that prosecutors did nothing wrong, but invading a lawyer's office? I don't know, George. That doesn't seem right to me.
Well, they said it wasn't an invasion. He had no problem, as you saw, with how that
if you were in his
conducted.
position, I think I'd advise you to say that, too.
You say you're not concerned at all about what Michael Cohen may say, but he is facing some potential legal jeopardy, in part dealing with that Stormy Daniels case. When I asked Cohen if the president directed him to make the payments to Stormy Daniels, he said he couldn't answer on advice of counsel. Did the president direct Michael Cohen to make those payments?
As far as I know, from his original statements and the president's statements and everything I've seen in terms of documents and the way it was reimbursed, no, the president did not originally know. At some point, probably a little foggy as to exactly when, the president found out and reimbursed him. I think that's the clear point because, and second, wasn't a campaign contribution. This is something you would have paid for no matter what.
But to be clear, the president did not direct Michael Cohen in advance to make those payments.
As far as I know, that is right. And second, even if he had, that would not necessarily be anything. If the president directed him to settle the case, he would have done that a year before, a year after. Didn't matter that he was running for office. That's something you settle because you don't want your family to be embarrassed. And the amount of money involved, $140,000, would indicate it was a nuisance settlement, as opposed to the millions of dollars that have been given away in cases like that in the past.
But the president did not promise in advance to reimburse Cohen for that?
That I don't know, whether there was an understanding between them. That I think Cohen knew he'd be reimbursed. It didn't seem to be any trouble in working out the reimbursement with the accountants.
There was another question that came up in my interview with Michael Cohen. It had to do with the Trump Tower meeting, that famous now Trump Tower meeting. Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort all met with these Russians who had indicated they had some dirt on Hillary Clinton. When I asked Michael Cohen, did the president know about that meeting ahead of time, again, he refused to answer on advice of counsel. What is the answer to that question?
Don't believe he did know about it. Don't believe he knew about it afterwards. I think that you could have very, very differing recollections on that because it was right in the heat of the campaign. And I was probably there that day. I don't remember it. Did somebody say something to me? I don't know. That goes off in you know what a campaign is like. It's complete helter-skelter. Again, it doesn't mean anything because it resulted in nothing. That went nowhere. She tried to get back in. She didn't. They never did anything with it.
Well, what it could mean is that the president and his team have said he didn't know about it in advance. If it turns out that he did, then at least he hadn't been telling the truth.
Well, I think you end up there with, at most, differing recollection. Since nothing happened with it, there'd be no reason to hide it. I mean, he could have said, yes, they did tell me about it. And what happened? Nothing.
What happened? Nothing from the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting between the Trump campaign and how many Russians? Is I think like 8 Russians, 5 Russians. I can never remember. It kept changing how many Russians were in the meeting, but nothing came from that meeting. We don't know that's true. That we don't know what Robert Mueller knows about that. But if you're going to go back and like deconstruct what Rudy Giuliani was doing in that clip regarding Michael Cohen, is he seems to be preparing for Michael Cohen saying things that don't match up with Donald Trump's story and saying, oh, it's all differing recollection. You know, if Michael Cohen says that Donald Trump knew about that June 9th, 2016 meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians and various, Paul Manafort was there and Jared Kushner was there and they offered dirt on Hillary Clinton, and it's like, looks almost like prima facie evidence of collusion. Well, if Michael Cohen says that Donald Trump knew about that beforehand, it's just differing recollections. Also, Rudy Giuliani seemed really hazy as to whether Donald Trump authorized the payment to Stormy Daniels before it happened, when he authorized it. That's something he should know by this point. And the fact that he's trying to make it vague and obfuscate when it happened and saying it's differing recollections again, that just seems like more evidence that Michael Cohen is about to flip, and maybe Rudy Giuliani is here to mitigate some of the damage from Michael Cohen flipping. I don't know why it is that Rudy Giuliani made this like last minute decision to do 3 different shows, but that was one. ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which I showed first because it had that great Michael Cohen introduction, because George Stephanopoulos had the Michael Cohen interview this week. The next two are more about the Mueller investigation and the new conditions that Trump has put on whether he'll testify to Robert Mueller, basically saying, you have to show me that there's evidence that I've committed a crime before I will go and testify, which is basically like, it's an FU thing. Like, this is trying to get Robert Mueller to say that I won't accept your conditions, and maybe that's the other thing that's about to break. That's what I was saying earlier. Maybe Robert Mueller is going to go for the subpoena because he can't accept conditions, that he has to like prove a crime before getting the testimony of the president. And well, that's a very small part of these next two clips. It's mostly about Rudy Giuliani trying to really bring down the trustworthiness with the American public of James Comey and Robert Mueller and the Mueller investigation. And he says the word corrupt a lot, and he makes a lot of assertions that you'll see both Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press and then Dana Bash over on CNN's State of the Union trying to fight different parts of the big smear going on here. And that's why I took both clips that are sort of on the same topic. This is the longest clip of the night. This is a little over 6 minutes. It's NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd asking. First, he does an introduction where he also talks about what the Senate Intelligence Committee did this week, where they contradicted the House Intelligence Committee and said, yeah, Russia was in the election and trying to help Donald Trump. And then he also talks about the Michael Cohen thing, and then talks to Rudy Giuliani about the new conditions on testimony, and gets big smears that I talked about that I will discuss with you a little more after we watch that second to last news clip for the night over here.
There were two pretty big developments related to the Russia investigation that flew under the radar during this holiday week. The first was the official report from the Senate Intelligence Committee supporting the conclusion of 3 U.S. intelligence agencies that determined that Donald Trump was helped by the Russians in the 2016 election. The other story was the apparent change of heart by President Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. Cohen once said he would take a bullet for the president, but this week he told ABC News, quote, "To be crystal clear, my wife, my daughter, and my son and this country have my first loyalty." Well, joining me now is the president's current lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Giuliani, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you very, very much.
Right.
Happy to be with you.
All right. Well, you had said that the 4th of July was basically a deadline of sorts for you to determine whether or not you would recommend President Trump sit down with Robert Mueller. It is now past the 4th of July. Where do we stand?
Well, I think we're pretty much decided where we are, and we await the decision of the independent counsel. We would not recommend an interview for the president unless they can satisfy us that there's some basis for this investigation. It's our firm belief, and we think nothing contradicts this, that the president did nothing wrong. In all the leaking that's gone on, there's been no leak of any fact that says the president conspired with anybody in Russia. I know from having been on the campaign that there was no contact with Russians, no discussion with Russians. So we've got to see something. I mean, something started this investigation. What we're asking him for is this the witch hunt that a lot of people think it is? Or is there a factual basis for this? You did that big, long counterintelligence investigation, which seems very, very questionable, with very biased people who hated Trump and wanted to stop him. What did they find? Show us something. Mueller's been at it for 13, 14 months. 1.4 million documents, 29 witnesses. What did he find? Is there somebody who says there was a meeting where Trump discussed conspiracy to do this? There's nothing.
Well, but actually, Mr. Mayor, in the public record, and you and I have actually had a discussion about one of these, in the public record, we have the president admitting that he misled the New York Times on the Donald Trump Jr. statement when it came to his role in the infamous Trump Tower meeting of June of 2016. We have, so that is, you said there's nothing, this is a public record of the president contradicting, and I know it is not a crime for the president to lie to us in the media. However, how is that not itself probable cause for Mr. Mueller to want to question the president?
Well, because the fact is that also in the public record is the conclusion of that meeting. And that is that nothing was done about it. That the person came in under the guise of having information about Clinton, but also to talk about adoptions. All she did was talk about adoptions.
Wait a minute. First of all, we don't know that. We don't. That has not been fully established. That was the story changed 3 times, Mr. So if the story changed, how are we so sure? Yeah, look, your own legal partner here in the president's team, Jay Sekulow, misled me. Now you had said he didn't intentionally do that. I take your word. He didn't. I take your word at that. But somebody misled him then. Your client may have misled him.
They already have all these facts. They can do with them what they want. They don't need I can tell them that the president's testimony will be exactly the same as he said about this.
Which part? What he said in the public record, or when he? I mean, we don't know what he said.
What he has said privately. He has had an opportunity to think about it, to refresh his recollection. He's given a statement about it, and it's clear that there was no discussion with him about this, and that nothing happened from it.
What's the president afraid of? He's not afraid to sit down with Kim Jong-un. He's not afraid of sitting down with Vladimir Putin. Why is he afraid to sit down with Robert Mueller?
One of the problems here, I think Jay and John Dowd would attest to this, is the president's very anxious to testify because he knows he's done nothing wrong. It's us, his lawyers, who have real hesitation about it. I mean, look at how biased the people who started this investigation were. I've never seen an investigation.
You think Robert Mueller's a biased man? You think Robert Mueller's a biased man?
No, but I think he's surrounded by biased people. Almost exclusively. He's got a guy who donated over $30,000 to Hillary. He's got someone who was crying at her loss party, victory party, whatever you want to call it. And his lead investigator is probably going to go to jail. The FBI agent who said you have to stop Trump. I mean, has there ever been an investigation of this magnitude with such obvious indications of extreme, disgusting bias, which totally corrupts the process? Can I expect these people to be objective about Donald Trump?
Then it sounds like you think Robert Mueller's corrupt. I mean, when you're saying all that, well, everything you're alleging then that he was willing to have you're making allegations that he was willing to have corrupt FBI agents on his team.
No, that's a fact. He had a corrupt FBI agent on his team.
And he fired him
He put him on his team.
And he got rid of him.
Well, after other people found out about the corrupt, he never bothered to vet him properly. And then he remains with a chief assistant and several others very close to him who have extraordinarily close ties to Hillary Clinton. And we've not looked at their text. If we had not looked at the other guy's text, we never would have known how much he hated Trump. But nobody's examined the text of the people working for him. Maybe they should. But in any event, we're still willing to do it if, in fact, they can satisfy us that there's a basis for this. And we think, and John Dowd started this back in January. And since we started it, we don't get an answer, which I'm sorry, Chuck, as a lawyer, makes me suspicious. Please be clear. President Trump wants to testify. We have to hold him back. And the only thing we've been able to do is it becomes easier as evidence of the corrupt nature of this investigation becomes clearer.
Let me ask you 2 other questions. Are you concerned?
So the word corrupt was used many times there. Of course, bias, extreme, disgusting bias, most corrupt investigation ever. I think that even comes out more in the next clip. And there's like so much spin there and so many like misstatements and misleading statements that you saw Chuck Todd only got to push back on a little bit about the June 2016 meeting and how that was like a real basis for the investigation, how Trump had misled the New York Times at least about that. And so he pushed back a little on that one piece, and you'll see Dana Bash from CNN State of the Union in this next clip also kind of like push back on one little piece, but there's just like such a big dynamic well, I think it was Chuck Todd several months ago who talked about how Donald Trump was, and especially through Rudy Giuliani and the latest team of lawyers, was basically using the O.J. Simpson strategy, which is to attack the prosecution, try to smear the prosecution. I guess Peter Strzok, the guy who texted that he wanted to get Donald Trump. He's like the Mark Furman of the Trump investigation. And if you believe that, you know, all the people who support Trump think that O.J. Simpson was guilty despite Mark Fuhrman, but they all believe Peter Strzok, I guess, is tainting the investigation against Donald Trump. And one thing I heard Rudy Giuliani say in all 3 interviews, and you heard it in that last clip, was that, you know, we saw Peter Strzok's bias by his texts. Maybe all the other people around Mueller should have their texts investigated. Of course, Peter Strzok and his illicit lover, his his adulterous lover, they were using FBI phones to text back and forth so that their spouses didn't see it, and that's how they got in trouble. You can't look at the non-FBI texts of other people around Mueller, but it seemed like that's what Rudy Giuliani was suggesting in that last clip, and I think he says the same thing in this next clip, talking to Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union, where she pushes back on like another small piece of the huge amount of bullshit coming from Rudy Giuliani trying to smear Robert Mueller and the investigation of Donald Trump. A different piece than Chuck Todd in the last clip. This is a little bit shorter, a little under 5 minutes for the last clip before the bonus Sandy and Dash clip at the end. This is 4 minutes 48 seconds from CNN State of the Union this morning here.
And that is the president's legal team setting new conditions for any special counsel interview of President Trump. Robert Mueller's team would have to show evidence of Trump wrongdoing and show that his testimony is essential to completing the investigation. I want to go straight to President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Mayor Giuliani, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. And these new terms, particularly that Robert Mueller must show proof of Trump wrongdoing to agree to an interview. You actually have said that you don't think that Mueller would even agree to it. So why do this dance? Why not just tell the special counsel, sorry, no interview?
Well, we'd like to know if there's any factual basis for the investigation originally, or they've developed one, because we can't find one, nor can anyone else, nor have they, with all the leaking they've done, even leaked one, which I think would have happened immediately because they want to justify themselves. The fact is, I should correct it. I didn't say they have to prove a crime.
Right.
What I said was they have to give us a factual basis, meaning some suspicion of a crime. For example, I can't initiate an investigation of my neighbor just because I don't like him, or just because he's politically different than me.
Right. So they need to prove.
Which is really
so they need
what
to
happened
prove
here.
to you that they have evidence, that they have more than suspicion that the president did something. I want to push back on you, though. Of course, there's a basis for this investigation. The whole investigation started back before the special counsel was even appointed, based on information that the FBI and Justice Department got from sources dealing with a whole bunch of people related to the Trump campaign. So it's a little bit of a red herring to say there's no basis and there's no evidence for this investigation.
The fact is that investigation is highly suspect. It's under investigation right now by Horowitz. He has suggested that it was influenced initially by bias. The same guy that did that, who has said horrendous things about Trump, never vetted by Mueller, became the head of Mueller's team. I mean, there's more. There are more things wrong.
Horowitz has talked about the Clinton investigation.
Dana, wait, let me finish. But then the guy who ran it was made in charge of this investigation and has unbelievable bias against President Trump. Now, how you can say that that's a legitimate investigation, well, then there are no illegitimate investigations. I mean, the reality is that there is no evidence of wrongdoing by the president, no evidence of collusion. People can have some evidence of Russian this, Russian that, but not a single bit of evidence. They've been through 1.4 million documents.
If that's the case, why doesn't the president just fire Robert Mueller? I mean, you're trying so hard to...
You people would... Because if he did it, everybody would say that he was guilty. And that's why he fired him. Look what happened with Comey. Now he's completely vindicated in firing Comey. The Horowitz report actually says if a president didn't do that, he would be derelict in his duties. I mean, Comey has turned out to be the biggest villain in this piece.
Okay. we could go and do a half an hour on trying to pick apart that. But let's just focus on one of the things that you said, that there's no evidence. You say that the special counsel hasn't produced evidence, but they haven't said that they have no evidence. I mean, they have. You say that there have been leaks. They've been remarkably tight-lipped, aside from what they've had to do with
reports. They leak
indictments
reports.
and such.
They leaked meetings. They're leaking on Manafort right now. They leaked Cohen before it happened.
But this is an ongoing investigation. We don't really know what they have and what they don't have. That's fair,
I have a pretty good idea because I've seen all the documents that they have. We've debriefed all their witnesses, and we've pressed them numerous times.
You've debriefed all of their witnesses?
Well, I think so. I mean, the ones that were involved in the joint defense agreement, which constitutes all the critical ones. They have nothing, Dana. They wouldn't be pressing for this interview if they had anything. If they had evidence of a crime, they'd write a report. And they can't write their report because on collusion, they have nothing.
Okay.
On obstruction, they have a constitutionally suspect theory that you can charge a president with some kind of crime for exercising his duties as a president and removing the worst FBI director in history that Hillary Clinton would have removed.
Well, we're going to wait and see what evidence they have. But on this question of the interview.
So you see there the final clip of Rudy Giuliani smearing James Comey, smearing Robert Mueller, why he had to make this emergency 3 different show appearance on the Sunday shows. This Sunday, is something going to happen this week? In addition to the Supreme Court nomination, in addition to the NATO summit, in addition to the meeting with Putin, is there some big shoe about to drop? Is that why? You can let me know what you think, and you can let me know what you think about whether Dana Perino or Chuck Todd did a better job of cross-examining Rudy Giuliani on all that spin, all that smear of James Comey and Robert Mueller and the Mueller investigation and the witch hunt well, whatever. You can let me know what you think. I appreciate all of you who've been watching along. I noticed I have multiple Super Chat contributions. Here you go. Thanks for... G. Wolf, and was that Flink Snapping Tips? I don't know how to pronounce that last one. And thanks, Sexy Bob, again. And if you want to give a Super Chat contribution, now's your last chance. I also have a PayPal donation. If you give a $5 contribution either through PayPal or Patreon, I will... And on PayPal, you have to give me your address if you want to get this hashtag LiberalViewer sticker. I also have these for at the $10 level, you get the sticker, and you also get the ACLU Constitution. It's the U.S. Constitution from the ACLU, upside down. U.S. Constitution from the ACLU has a Know Your Rights section in the back. That's for people who contribute one time through PayPal or monthly through Patreon at the $10 level. So there are links for that in the video description. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out for you. And before I finish up, I promised from this morning, this is Sandy the dog and Dash the cat trying to let us know they're hungry for breakfast in a 3-clip montage edited together for the end of the show over here. So that's what it's like around here. Now Sandy's sleeping over there. I don't know what Dash is doing, but thanks for all of you who joined me. If you like the clips I picked out, if you like the show, you can not only contribute in the ways I already described, but you can give me a thumbs up. You can give me a supportive comment down in the comment section, and I will be back next week, hopefully a little bit earlier. There were all sorts of things that delayed me today and made me more tired, but I got it all done, and now it's up to you to watch it. And if you liked it, let me know, and I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future, picking out the best clips from the corporate media and giving my commentary and criticism. And I will see all of you, I don't know exactly when, but if not sometime this week, for some breaking news about the meeting with Putin or the Supreme Court nominee. Then it will be back next Sunday, and until then I will be seeing all of you around the internet.